Captain Lucas Draycott leaned back in his chair, his boots propped up on the console of his aging but reliable starship, the Eclipse. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air as his crew buzzed with excitement. They had just returned from their latest mission, a daring rescue of the Selverian ambassador from hostile raiders. It wasn't every day you saved an intergalactic diplomat, and Lucas was proud of how his crew had handled the chaos. Word is, his first mate, Callum, said with a smirk that Selverians are big on rewards. What do you think it'll be? A fancy medal. Credits. Lucas grinned. Knowing them? Probably some exotic pet. Maybe one of those glowing lizards they're so fond of. Wouldn't mind one of those. Callum laughed, but their conversation was cut short by a sharp chime from the ship's comm system. Captain Draycott, this is Ambassador Lyrax of Selveria. Please prepare to receive your reward. Lucas stood, brushing the dust off his jacket. Time to find out, he said, heading toward the docking bay with Callum close behind. The bay doors hissed open, revealing a Selverian delegation dressed in their ceremonial silver robes. At their center stood Ambassador Lyrax, his elongated head and shimmering blue skin glowing softly under the ship's lights. Beside him was a tall, hooded figure. Captain Draycott, Lyrax began in his melodic voice. Your bravery and selflessness in rescuing me have earned you our highest gratitude. As is our tradition, we present to you a gift of great value. Lucas's eyes flicked to the hooded figure, a pet. The shape seemed too tall, too humanoid. His confusion deepened as Lyrax gestured, and the figure stepped forward, pulling back the hood to reveal a stunningly beautiful alien woman. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her eyes a bright, glowing gold. Her hair, long and silken, shimmered like threads of silver. She stood tall and proud, her expression calm, but her eyes wary. Lucas blinked. Bah, Ambassador, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I thought you might give me, I don't know, a pet. Not. He gestured helplessly at the woman. Lyrax tilted his head, confused. She is not a pet, Captain. She is Eliana, a cultural emissary. By joining your crew, she will share knowledge of our ways and learn yours in return. This is an honor. Lucas glanced at Callum, who was clearly struggling to suppress laughter. Right, Lucas said carefully. I appreciate the gesture, but this seems unconventional. It is our way, Lyrax said firmly. Eliana is now under your care. Treat her with respect, and you will learn much from her. Eliana finally spoke, her voice smooth and melodic. I will not be a burden to you, Captain. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, Lucas saw something in her golden eyes, an emotion he couldn't quite place. The ship's corridors were quieter than usual, as if the crew was holding its collective breath. News of Eliana's arrival had spread quickly, and Lucas could feel the weight of their curiosity. He led Eliana toward the crew quarters, glancing over his shoulder now and then to make sure she was keeping up. To her credit, Eliana walked with a grace that made her seem like she belonged there. She didn't flinch at the metallic hum of the ship or the occasional hissing of air vents. She seemed calm. Too calm, Lucas thought, considering she'd just been handed over to strangers. So, Lucas began, breaking the silence. This emissary thing, how does that work? You stay on my ship, watch us do our jobs, and write a report to your people. Eliana's golden eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. I observe, I learn, and I teach. It is a mutual exchange of knowledge, Captain. Nothing more. Right, Lucas muttered. He wasn't sure if he believed that. He stopped outside a modest cabin and opened the door with a tap on the panel. This'll be your room. It's not fancy, but it's private. Eliana stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the compact space. The room was small but functional, with a single bed, a storage unit, and a small desk. She placed her slender fingers on the edge of the desk, as if testing its stability. This will suffice, she said simply. Lucas crossed his arms. Look, I didn't ask for this. I don't even understand why they thought giving me, assigning me. You was a good idea. I don't mean to be rude, but what's really going on here? Eliana turned to face him, her expression softening just a fraction. I understand your confusion, Captain, but I assure you, I am not here to cause trouble. My presence is as unexpected for me as it is for you. Lucas raised an eyebrow. So you didn't volunteer for this? No, she admitted, lowering her gaze for the first time. But my role is vital to my people. Refusing would have brought dishonor to my family. The honesty in her voice caught Lucas off guard. He wasn't sure what to say, so he just nodded. Well, he said after an awkward pause, I guess we'll figure it out as we go. But if you need anything, let me know. Eliana inclined her head in a subtle nod. Thank you, Captain. As Lucas left her room, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than she was letting on. Something about her seemed off. Not dangerous, but guarded, like she was hiding a part of herself. He sighed, heading back to the bridge. This is going to be a long trip, he muttered to himself. The Eclipse sailed smoothly through the void of space, its engines humming a steady tune. But inside the ship, tension simmered. Captain Lucas Draycott couldn't stop replaying his conversation with Eliana in his head. There was something about her, something she wasn't saying. He found her in the observation lounge later that evening, standing by the large window that offered a view of endless stars. Her silver hair shimmered under the soft light, and she seemed lost in thought, her golden eyes reflecting the galaxy outside. Enjoying the view? Lucas asked, stepping inside. She didn't turn to look at him. Your ship moves with purpose. Efficient. But there is no art to it. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Art doesn't keep the engines running. Perhaps, she said quietly. Then, after a pause, your people seem so focused on survival. Yet you thrive. You push beyond your limits. It is unusual. Lucas leaned against the wall, studying her. You say that like it's a bad thing. She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Not bad. Just different. Most species accept their place in the galaxy. But humans, your kind, never stop reaching. Lucas shrugged. Maybe that's why we've lasted this long. Before Eliana could respond, the ship's alarms blared. Red lights flashed, and the intercom crackled to life. Captain to the bridge. We've got an unidentified vessel on our scanners. Callum's voice barked. Lucas shot Eliana a look. Stay here. But she followed him anyway, her footsteps light as they hurried to the bridge. The crew was tense, their eyes glued to the holographic display showing the approaching ship. It was sleek and dark, its design unfamiliar. Scan it, Lucas ordered, taking his seat. It's not broadcasting any identification codes, Callum said, his voice tight. But it's armed, heavily. Eliana stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the screen. That's a Crethan vessel, she said calmly. The crew froze. Crethans were notorious for their aggression, and their technology was leagues ahead of most species. What do they want with us? Lucas asked, his voice low. They're not after you, Eliana said, her tone grim. They're here for me. The bridge fell silent. Lucas turned to her, his eyes narrowing. Care to explain? Eliana hesitated, then straightened her posture. The Crethans are allied with a faction of my people who want me silenced. I know too much about their plans that could destabilize half the galaxy. Lucas swore under his breath. You couldn't have mentioned this earlier. I didn't expect them to find me so quickly, she said, her voice steady despite the tension. But now that they're here, you must decide. Will you give me to them? Lucas clenched his jaw. His crew's eyes were on him, waiting for his command. He looked at Eliana and saw the faintest flicker of fear in her golden eyes. No, he said firmly. We don't hand people over. Strap in. This is going to get messy. The Eclipse shook as the Crethan ship fired its first warning shot, a pulse of energy that streaked just past the hull. Lucas gripped the armrests of his captain's chair, his crew already scrambling to battle stations. "Shields up," Callum barked. The holographic display lit up with a grid of energy readings as the ship's defenses activated. "They're hailing us," said Jenny, the communications officer, her fingers flying over the console. "Audio and visual." "Put them on," Lucas said, trying to keep his voice steady. The main screen flickered, and the image of a Crethan commander appeared. Its scaly, angular face was framed by spiny ridges, and its eyes glowed an unsettling shade of red. The creature's voice was sharp and guttural. "Human vessel," it hissed, "you are harboring a fugitive of the Selverian Empire. Surrender her, and you will be spared." Lucas glanced at Eliana, who stood at the edge of the bridge, her posture rigid but composed. Her golden eyes locked onto the Crethan commander's image with an intensity Lucas hadn't seen before. "Funny," Lucas said, leaning forward. "Last I checked, this is my ship, and I don't take orders from overgrown lizards." The Crethan's eyes narrowed. "Do not test our patience, human. Hand her over, or your ship will be reduced to debris." "They're charging weapons, Captain," Callum warned. Lucas smirked. "Eliana, you got anything to add?" Eliana stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative. "You know who I am," she said, addressing the Crethan. "If you fire on this vessel, you risk provoking the wrath of every ally humanity has. Are you prepared to face such consequences?" The Crethan commander snarled. "Your allies will not save you. We will have you, one way or another." The screen went dark as the Crethans cut the transmission. A heavy silence settled over the bridge. "They're going to attack," Callum said grimly. "Then we hit them first," Lucas replied. "Target their engines. Let's see if we can slow them down." "Captain, their ship is far more advanced than ours," Eliana said, stepping closer. "A direct confrontation will not end well." Lucas turned to her. "Got a better idea?" Eliana hesitated, then nodded. "If we can lure them into the asteroid field nearby, their larger ship will struggle to maneuver. It will give us an advantage." Lucas grinned. "Now you're thinking like a spacer." "Jenny, plot a course to that asteroid field. Callum, keep those shields up. Everyone else, hold on tight." The Eclipse surged forward, the Crethan vessel in pursuit. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic maze of spinning rocks and debris. Lucas's grip tightened on the controls as the ship weaved through the narrow passages. The Crethans followed, their weapons firing sporadically, but missing as the Eclipse danced through the field. Lucas glanced at Eliana, who watched the chaos with calm determination. "You're full of surprises," he muttered. "And you're reckless," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But perhaps that's what we need." The Eclipse darted through the asteroid field, its engines roaring with every sharp turn. Lucas kept a firm grip on the controls, his eyes scanning the chaotic maze of rocks spinning dangerously close to the ship's hull. Behind them, the Crethan vessel struggled to keep up, its bulk too large and unwieldy for such tight navigation. "They're losing ground," Callum called out from the weapons station. "They can't maneuver like we can." "Good," Lucas said, his voice tight. "But don't get too comfortable. They've still got range on us." A sudden jolt rocked the ship as a glancing shot from the Crethans skimmed their shields. Sparks flew from one of the control panels, and a crew member scrambled to extinguish a small fire. "Shields down to 60%, shouted Jenny. "Keep us moving," Lucas ordered. "Eliana, any ideas on how to shake them for good?" Eliana, standing near the navigation console, closed her eyes and placed her hand on the surface of the panel. Lucas was about to question her when the holographic map flickered and zoomed in on a dense cluster of asteroids ahead. "There," she said, her voice calm but strained. "A narrow passage. Their ship cannot follow us, but you must be precise." "Precise is my middle name," Lucas muttered, steering the Eclipse toward the path she indicated. The opening was barely wider than the ship itself, and the sharp turns made even the crew hold their breath. Eliana's hands trembled slightly as she focused on the navigation screen. "Left, then hard right," she instructed, her tone clipped. Lucas followed her directions, weaving through the obstacles with practiced skill. Each move brought them closer to safety, but he couldn't help noticing the strain in her voice. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and her normally calm expression was tight with concentration. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked, sparing her a glance. "I am. Fine," she said, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. The Crethan ship fired another volley, but their shots went wide, striking the asteroids instead. The resulting explosion sent debris hurtling through the field, further complicating the chase. Lucas gritted his teeth and pushed the ship harder. "We're almost through," Callum yelled as the end of the passage came into view. Eliana suddenly staggered, clutching the console for support. Lucas's eyes flicked to her, concern flashing across his face. "Eliana." She began, but her words were cut off as her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. Lucas swore under his breath, quickly locking the controls into autopilot as the Eclipse cleared the passage. He knelt beside her, his hand gently shaking her shoulder. "Eliana, what's wrong?" Her golden eyes fluttered open, dimmer than before. "I used too much energy," she whispered. "My telepathic link. It's draining." Lucas frowned. "Telepathic link? You didn't think to mention that earlier." "No time," she murmured weakly. "Rest," he said, his voice softer. "We'll handle the rest." As the Crethan ship fell behind, Lucas carried Eliana to the medbay, his mind racing with questions. Who exactly was this woman? And what more was she hiding? The medbay was dimly lit, the soft hum of the ship's systems filling the silence. Lucas sat by Eliana's bedside, his arms crossed as he watched her sleep. She looked fragile, her violet skin pale, and her silver hair tangled. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, she had been guiding them through an asteroid field with calm precision. "You're in deep, Lucas," he muttered to himself. He had faced raiders, hostile aliens, and space anomalies before, but nothing felt as complicated as this. A soft groan pulled him out of his thoughts. Eliana's golden eyes blinked open, still dull but aware. She shifted slightly, wincing as she propped herself up on her elbows. "Easy," Lucas said, placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. "You took a pretty big hit back there." "I will recover," she said softly, though her voice carried a hint of exhaustion. "Thank you for not giving me to them." "Wasn't an option," Lucas replied. "But I need answers, Eliana. You've been holding back, and I can't protect you, or this crew, if I don't know what we're up against." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. For a moment, Lucas thought she might refuse, but then she sighed and nodded. "The Crethans are working with a rogue faction of my people," she began. "A faction that seeks to overthrow our leadership and reshape the galaxy in their image. They believe in domination, not coexistence." Lucas frowned. "And you? What's your part in this?" "I was once part of the Selverian Council," Eliana admitted. "I uncovered their plans, secret alliances, weapons research, experiments to enhance telepathic abilities like mine. When I tried to expose them, they framed me as a traitor. That's why they're after you," Lucas said, the pieces clicking into place. "You know too much." "Yes," she said quietly. "If they capture me, they will either force me to join them or silence me permanently." Lucas rubbed the back of his neck, the weight of the situation sinking in. "You realize this isn't just about you anymore, right? They'll come after us too. My crew." Eliana met his gaze, her expression earnest. "I never intended to endanger you, Captain. But I had no choice. If their plans succeed, the balance of power in the galaxy will crumble. Millions will suffer." Lucas leaned back in his chair, letting out a long breath. "So what do we do?" Eliana hesitated, then said, "We expose them. I have evidence hidden on a remote outpost, proof of their plans. If we can retrieve it, we can rally allies to our cause." Lucas nodded slowly. "All right, but let's make one thing clear. You're not doing this alone. If we're in this, we're in it together." A flicker of gratitude crossed her face. "Thank you, Captain." Lucas stood, a small grin tugging at his lips. "Don't thank me yet. Things are about to get messy." As he left the medbay, Lucas felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Whatever lay ahead, he wasn't about to back down. The Eclipse was drifting through the empty stretches of space, its engines purring softly as the crew prepared for their next move. Lucas stood on the bridge, staring out at the distant stars, his mind racing. The plan to retrieve the evidence from the outpost seemed straightforward, but now that they were so close, everything felt uncertain. He could feel the tension building among his crew. The trust that had once been so solid was beginning to crack, and Lucas wasn't sure how to fix it. Callum's warning still echoed in his ears. Some of the crew didn't trust Eliana, and as they got closer to their destination, Lucas couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. "Captain, we need to talk," said Callum, his voice tense as he walked up behind Lucas. Lucas turned to face him. "About what?" "About Eliana," Callum said bluntly. "The crew is getting restless. They don't like having her around." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "I'm well aware of that, but she's not our enemy." "I know," Callum said, his voice softer now. "But if we keep her on board, we risk everything. She's got the knowledge to destroy us. Lucas, I just want to make sure we're not making a mistake." Lucas ran a hand through his hair. "I know what's at stake, but this isn't about me or her. It's about stopping the Crethans and that rogue faction of hers. If we don't, everything we've fought for is pointless." Callum didn't reply immediately, but Lucas could tell the doubt lingered. He sighed, turning back to the stars. "We'll deal with it when we get back. Let's focus on the mission." As they approached the outpost, Lucas's uneasy feeling only grew. He knew the crew was divided, and he feared what might happen if that division boiled over. It wasn't long before his worries were realized. "Captain, we've got trouble." Jenny's voice came over the comms. "Some of the crew are refusing to follow orders. They're talking about taking Eliana. They're calling her a threat." "What?" Lucas's stomach dropped. "Who?" "I don't know all the names, but a few are gathering in the lower decks. They've armed themselves." Lucas felt a cold chill run down his spine. A mutiny. His own crew, turning on him. "Callum, gather the others," Lucas ordered, his voice hard. "We're going down there." The engine room was locked down, and as Lucas approached with Callum at his side, he could hear shouting from inside. The crew members who had turned against Eliana were demanding she be handed over. "You don't know what she's capable of," one of them shouted, his voice shaky. "She's the reason the Crethans are after us. We're all going to die if we don't get rid of her." Lucas's heart pounded as he stepped forward, taking a deep breath. Enough. The room fell silent as the crew members turned to face him. Lucas stood tall, his hands at his sides, looking each one of them in the eye. "If you think I'm going to throw Eliana to the wolves to save your skins, you're wrong," Lucas said, his voice cold but steady. "I'll stand with her. And if you don't like it, then you'll have to go through me." There was a tense pause, the crew members exchanging nervous glances. For a moment, Lucas thought they might back down. But then one of them stepped forward, a hand on his weapon. "We're not going to let you drag us all into a war, Lucas," he said. "She's not worth it." "You're wrong," Lucas said firmly, stepping closer. "I'm not giving up on this crew, and if you can't see that, maybe it's time for you to go." The situation on the Eclipse had escalated quickly. Lucas stood in front of the crew members who had turned against him, the tension so thick it felt like it could suffocate them all. His hand hovered near the weapon at his side, ready for whatever came next, but he didn't want to fight. He needed them on his side, and he wasn't willing to give up on his crew just yet. Last chance, Lucas said, his voice firm. Stand down, and we'll talk this through. You're making a mistake. The crew member who had spoken earlier, the one who seemed to be leading the rebellion, narrowed his eyes. We've given you enough chances, Captain. You're putting us all in danger. We can't trust her, he said, gesturing toward Eliana, who was standing quietly at the back of the group. Lucas's gaze shifted to Eliana, who met his eyes without flinching. Despite everything that had happened, she still trusted him. And that meant he had to stand strong, no matter what. We've been through a lot together, Lucas said, his voice steady. I've led this crew through thick and thin, and I won't let a handful of people turn us against each other. You may not trust Eliana, but I do. And if you can't see why, then maybe it's time for you to leave. The rebel crew member stepped forward, his hand tightening around the handle of his weapon. This isn't about Eliana anymore, Lucas. This is about survival. We won't make it out of this mess with her on board. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. You're wrong. The only way we survive is by sticking together. And that means no one gets left behind. For a moment, there was silence. The crew members exchanged uneasy glances. Lucas could feel their hesitation. He knew they didn't want to turn on him, but fear had clouded their judgment. And Eliana's secret was something they couldn't ignore. Before anyone could make a move, the ship shuddered, a violent jolt sending them all stumbling. The warning lights flashed, and the alarm blared. Something had hit the Eclipse. The sound of incoming fire echoed through the ship. Crethans. Jenny's voice rang out from the bridge. They've found us. They're closing in fast. Lucas cursed under his breath, his focus shifting instantly. Forget the mutiny. We've got bigger problems. The rebel crew members hesitated, their weapons still raised but uncertain now. The Crethan ship had arrived, and their escape was no longer an option. They would have to fight, and fast. Grab your weapons, Lucas ordered, his voice commanding. It's time to defend this ship. He turned to Eliana, his eyes meeting hers. Stay close. We don't know what they're capable of. She nodded, her face set with determination. I'll help. I fought before. Lucas couldn't help but feel a surge of respect for her. In that moment, he realized just how much he had underestimated her. The battle for survival was now theirs to fight together. The ship lurched again, this time more violently, as the Crethan ship fired another round. Lucas ran toward the crew members who had once been loyal, now forced to decide, fight or surrender. Let's do this, he shouted, leading the charge. The Eclipse had been through a lot, but it wasn't about to go down without a fight. They were about to make their final stand. The battle had erupted with a ferocity Lucas had never expected. The Eclipse was under heavy fire from the Crethan ship, and the crew was scrambling to keep the ship intact. Alarms blared as the hull shook with every hit, but there was no turning back now. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. Lucas stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the flashing redouts. The ship's shields were already down to 30%, and the Crethan vessel wasn't letting up. Its massive guns fired again, sending shockwaves through the ship. Report, Lucas barked, his voice sharp. Shields are failing, Captain, Callum said, his fingers flying over the control panel. We can't take another hit like that. Damn it, Lucas muttered under his breath. The Eclipse was tough, but it wasn't invincible. They needed to get the Crethans off their tail, or they wouldn't make it out of this alive. Eliana, Lucas shouted. We need a plan. Eliana stood by the side, her face pale but determined. Despite the chaos, she was focused, her mind racing. If I can access their communication systems, I may be able to send a signal that'll confuse their targeting systems, she said. It won't stop them, but it'll buy us time. Lucas nodded. Do it. Eliana moved quickly, her hands moving in a blur as she tapped into the ship's console. Her focus was intense, and Lucas could see the strain on her face. Every time the Eclipse was hit, Her concentration faltered for a moment. She was still weak from earlier, but she wasn't about to back down now. Meanwhile, Lucas and Callum were working to keep the ship intact. They avoided the Crethan fire as best they could, but the ship's hull was starting to show signs of damage. Pieces of metal groaned and buckled, and the lights flickered. They couldn't last much longer in this condition. "We need to get close enough to launch a counterattack," Lucas said, grinding his teeth. "If we can hit their engines, we might be able to disable them." Callum's eyes widened. "It's a suicide mission, Captain. We'll be sitting ducks." Lucas met his gaze. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, we'll be dead anyway." As the Eclipse limped closer to the Crethan ship, Eliana's voice cut through the noise. "I've done it. They're confused. Their targeting systems are malfunctioning." "Good work," Lucas shouted, already heading for the weapons control. The Eclipse shuddered again as the Crethan ship fired once more, but now the blast went wide, missing them by a mile. "We have a chance," Callum said, grinning. "Let's take it." Lucas gave a sharp nod and turned to the crew. "Prepare to fire. Aim for their engines." With the Crethans temporarily blinded, the crew of the Eclipse fired everything they had. The blast struck the Crethan ship's engines, and the massive ship groaned as it veered off course. The impact sent shockwaves through the ship, and for a moment, Lucas thought they might have done it. But the Crethans were not finished. The ship righted itself, its weapons still active. This wasn't over. "We've damaged their engines, but they're not giving up," Eliana said, her voice strained. "We need to finish this. Now." Lucas clenched his fists. "Then let's make sure they can't fight back." The final strike was coming, but the battle was far from over. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fate of the Eclipse, and everyone on board, hung in the balance. The Eclipse shuddered one last time as the final blast from their weapons hit the Crethan ship's main power core. The impact was massive, and the enemy vessel exploded into a bright flash of light and debris. For a moment, everything was silent. The only sound the soft hum of the Eclipse's engines. Lucas stood at the bridge, staring at the empty space where the Crethan ship had been. His hands were still shaking, but he couldn't wipe the grin from his face. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. "Is it over?" Callum's voice broke through the silence. Lucas nodded, still staring out at the debris field. "It's over." Eliana, who had been silent throughout the final battle, stepped up behind Lucas. Her golden eyes, though still tired, glimmered with a quiet sense of relief. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it." Lucas turned to her, his expression serious. "You're not out of danger yet, Eliana. We still need to make sure your evidence gets into the right hands. The fight with the Crethans might be over, but the war with your people is just beginning." Eliana nodded, her face hardening as she thought about the challenges ahead. "I know, but now we have a chance. We can expose the truth." The crew stood behind them, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They had come together when it mattered most, each one of them fighting for the same cause. They had been through a hell of a lot, but they had made it through as a team. "We should head to the outpost," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "We need to get that evidence before the Crethans regroup. It's time to finish what we started." The crew moved quickly, preparing the ship for the final leg of the journey. The outpost was just a short jump away, and everyone knew the stakes. Eliana's information was crucial, and if they didn't act fast, the rogue faction of her people would destroy any chance of peace in the galaxy. As the Eclipse made the jump to the outpost, Lucas couldn't help but think about how far they had come. From the moment he had rescued Eliana, he had never imagined it would lead to this. Fighting off alien forces, facing mutiny, and risking it all to uncover a conspiracy that could change the future of the galaxy. But here they were, standing on the brink of something new. The outpost came into view, a small, isolated station floating in the middle of nowhere. They had no idea what they would face when they arrived. But Lucas was ready. His crew was ready. And most importantly, Eliana was ready. "We've come this far," Lucas said, his voice steady. "Now let's see it through to the end." Eliana turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "Together, Captain." With that, the Eclipse made its final approach to the outpost, and the crew braced themselves for whatever came next. They had already faced the impossible and come out on top. Now, they were ready to take on the unknown. A new frontier awaited them, and Lucas was determined to face it head-on.